And when we're talking a special global rain, and that's why it's mentioned for 40 days and 40 nights, it is estimated by these gentlemen that that rain came down at 3 to 4 feet per hour. We could not possibly, even in our minds, get a grip on what this rain must have been like. Because when you pump that amount of ocean water, heated ocean water, into the Earth's atmosphere, it would be coming down at approximately 3 to 4 feet per hour. Now, I want you to think about when we have a hurricane or a bad storm, what happens to the beach? It leaves, doesn't it? It gets eroded and it gets carried off. So basically, when you have this kind of rain, it's eroding the pre-flood world. It's basically washing it away. But that's not all. When you have under-ocean movement, and here we have the whole floor of the ocean moving rather radically, if you'll excuse me saying so, we have tsunamis, which are incorrectly called tidal waves, but you know what I'm talking about, tsunamis. And remember we had that one on Christmas Day in Indonesia that hit Indonesia a few years back, and that was just a little, excuse me, a 5-foot thump in the bottom of the ocean that was approximately, I think it was 500 miles long, but it was just a little thump, and it caused all that damage. Because when you get that kind of movement in the ocean floor, it displaces all that water, and all that energy's got to go somewhere. And when it comes inland, it just is devastating. It's not bad when you're out on the water. If you remember when that happened, there were people out skin diving that it didn't affect. They kind of went, and that was it. It's when it comes on land that it is so devastating and it destroys everything. Well, now picture, we're not talking about a little shelf going punk. We're talking about the whole planet being ripped apart. What kind of tsunamis would we be looking at? Pretty bad, right? And so you have tsunamis. You have 3 to 4 feet per hour of rain coming down for over a month. You have superheated geysers. The continents are being literally ripped apart. Not a good day to be outside the ark, right? No. Anyway, and so that would have caused these continents, as they're being sucked into the mantle of the earth, as the ocean floor is being sucked into the mantle of the earth, we believe the continents, these guys suggest that the continents were moving at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Can you just picture Australia chasing you at 5 to 10 miles per hour? This wouldn't be good, right? So this was judgment. It was not the rains came down and the floods came up. Nothing like that at all. Okay, this was God's wrath. It was judgment. It was bad. And as always, even in the midst of all this catastrophe and death, God provided a way of escape, didn't he? He provided the ark. And Noah, we're told over in Peter, actually preached and told people. He tried to get people to come. Do you realize that Noah's in-laws didn't come? Because only 8 people were on the boat. His sons' wives were there, but where were their families? Where was Noah's family? Where was Noah's wife's family? Nobody else came. Can you imagine how hard it was to get in that ark knowing that their whole families were out there when all that started? That was horrible, wasn't it? But see, God did provide a way for those that trusted him. And I want you to really take that picture home, because if we don't share Jesus with people, people are going to face eternity in judgment, which will be much worse than this flood. And they will burn for eternity. So that's worth it for us to get out of our comfort zone and at least share the information about the ark. Because the ark is Jesus, isn't it? That's the way through the judgment that's going to come. This was the first judgment. Second judgment's going to be by fire. We're not selling fire insurance, though. We're actually trying to introduce them to the Lord of the universe and how they can be his child, right? Through what God's already done. But anyway, okay, so that's what that happened. Now, as those continents are moving around like that, you had some continents banging into each other. And even the evolutionary scientists, this is a picture of India ramming into Asia. So India rammed into Asia. Now, the secular scientists will tell you the same thing. We all think India rammed into Asia. We all think there was an original supercontinent. We all think that Pangaea was the last supercontinent. We just disagree about how long it took, when it happened, how it happened. So I want you to be aware of that. We all have the exact same scientific evidence. We choose to interpret it differently because of our starting point. Okay? All right, so what is this? This they think was long and slow, and then it went like this and turned into mountains. Okay? which we would call the Himalayas and that area, Mount Everest, you know the ones? Okay, Tibetan Plateau. That's what they think. Everything is long and slow. I'm so glad I'm a Christian because we do it bang, zoom, fast. Okay, and so that's what we think happened. It was catastrophic. It wasn't long and slow. It was because this was, don't hit your sister. Okay, this was judgment, and it wasn't like they think. And so the evidence would look the same either way. Now, a lot of people will question, well, how did we get, I don't know if you realize this, they find fossils of marine animals even at the summit of mountains. They find, this is an ammonite fossil, and they found ammonite fossils at the summit of Mount Everest. Okay, when I was speaking in Alaska, Mount McKinley is the tallest mountain in the world. Mount Everest is the highest mountain in the world, but Mount McKinley is the tallest. It starts at sea level and is taller. Mount Everest starts on the Tibetan Plateau, so it's already got the head start. So it's higher, but it's not taller. Both have sea fossils at the summits of them. They told me when I was there, oh yeah, there's sea fossils at the summit of Mount McKinley too. And so we would have to question, well, how could that be? Now we know that the floodwaters covered even the high mountains, but I just told you that the high mountains were eroded away. They were washed away and eroded away, and they were carried off, and we're going to talk more about that in a second. But I want you to understand that when everything was ripped apart, the earth bleeds mantle. If you cut me, I bleed blood, because that's what's inside of me. If you break the earth open, it bleeds mantle, which is, some of us would call it magma, and when it comes out, it's lava, but it's molten rock, isn't it? So as those continents are being ripped apart, molten rock is coming out. It's bleeding it out. It's called extrusion, and it's extruding out of the interior of the earth. And as it does that, it's laying down new ocean floors because the mantle is made up of basalt rock. So it's actually laying down new ocean floors. So as on one side, the fire's sucking in the ocean floors. On the other side, where it's being ripped apart, new ocean floors are being formed. The trick is this. When they first come out of the mantle, they're hot. So they're thicker. And I just want to bring you all home on this. Everybody's baked cookies at home at some point in time, right? When you first get the cookies out of the oven, have you ever noticed they're thicker? And then when they cool off, they get thinner? You notice that? Okay. Same with the rock. When it first comes out, it's thicker. And when it cools, it would get thinner and it would settle back into the mantle. While it's thicker, it literally pushes the Earth's oceans inland. So as you've got this new ocean floor that's riding thicker in the mantle, the Earth's oceans literally are pushed inland. And that's why everything was basically leveled out. Like at SeaWorld, they said if you leveled everything out, we'd be under 2 miles deep of water today. Well, this process did level everything out for a time. And so the oceans were literally pushed inland over the land, okay? And so at the end of the flood, when those new ocean floors would have cooled, that might have been that 150-day mark that the Bible tells us about. Remember, it says that after 150 days, the water started to recede. So it might have taken 5 months for the new ocean floors to cool and start to settle back in the mantle so that the water would start to recede. Did you have a question, AJ?
What is the evolution theory as to how that fossil got onto Earth, really?
They also believe that the mountains were pushed upward. They just think it happened over millions and millions of years. So they think that it used to be under the ocean, and then for whatever reason, that part of the world started to upwarp. Try that in your computer sometime. It'll tell you it's misspelled every time. It upwarped, and as it upwarped, then the fossils were found on the top of the mountain. Once again, they just think it happened longer and slower.
If it happened so slowly, then why didn't the fish just get out of the...
Well, no, they believe that when you have, even currently, if you have, let's say, any kind of tectonic movement or a landslide under the ocean, things will get caught in that landslide. They're called turbidity currents, and they're full of sediments. And so things will get caught in those, and then they can become fossilized. And so they're figuring that something in the process of it being upwarped, it was traumatic, and there were underwater landslides and stuff like that, and so that's where they would think they were fossilized. Does that make sense? I'll throw you this one out, and this will make more sense as we go through this. When I was in Alaska, we went to go see Portage Glacier. And when we went to see Portage Glacier, you have to go on a boat to see it because it's receding, so it's melting, and you have to go way back on a boat to see it. And as we're going back there, the naturalist on the boat, that's the scientist on the boat, was saying how these mountains that you see here eroded off the coast of California, were deposited here, and upwarped about 10 million years ago. And I bumped my husband and I go, well, she's right about everything but the time. You know, it all eroded off during the flood. And then at the end of the flood, the mountains were upwarped, you know. This is what I'm saying by we really agree on the scientific evidence as far as the evidence goes. We just disagree on how to interpret when and how fast. Does that make sense? And it's good to know that as Christians, guys. When somebody tries to tell you, oh, you're a Christian, you know, you guys don't do anything scientifically. Well, that's not true. We have the exact same scientific evidence they do. We're just interpreting it differently, and we don't interpret it stupidly. I'm going to tell you that creation science is constantly changing its views as it gathers more information, but we never change the part that's Scripture. We strictly change the part that's science. So it's really cutting edge. Do any of you read Answers Magazine or Creation Magazine or any of that? Man, if you get Answers Magazine, you will see there's always a technical article in the back end, and they'll keep you up. This is just an old Answers Magazine. Okay, but they'll keep you up on the information. And some of you are thinking, oh man, no more science, kill me. But some of you might actually be into science, and like you'd probably enjoy it because you've got an inquiring mind, and they've got a lot of really good articles. And then you can go on their website too. Yes?
So it rained 40 days and 40 nights, and then after, you said 150 days, everything receded.
Started
to, yeah. But where does it say biblically that they know how, like, the new pieces of crust were created? It doesn't say anything.
No, absolutely not. What it says was all the high mountains were covered, and if I remember correctly, it was well, I know it was over 20 feet deep, and I can't remember. There's an exact amount. It says how many cubits, by how many cubits all the high mountains were covered. Okay, so we know that the entire planet was covered. That's what the Bible tells us.
So, but we know that this process was done by recent events, very similar, and then they just say, okay, you know, this is probably what happened back then. Actually,
that's a very good question, Jessica. What we have is that the Scripture tells us that the entire planet was covered, that nothing that was outside of the ark that didn't swim really well survived. Okay, so because it would have had to tread water for a year. Okay, so that means everything was wiped out unless it lived in the water. Every land creature that breathed air died. Now, that's important because that's over 30 times. And I'm pretty sure it's over 30 times. I haven't counted it recently. But it tells over and over again everything that had the breath of life in it died. Okay, that's important. From there, the scientists have looked at those magnetic field lines I was telling you about. They've looked at the fossil record. They've looked at the scientific evidence, and those 6 guys that I told you were so brilliant have put together this scientific model that fits the evidence and it fits the Scripture. That's why it's a model. It's not necessarily true. It's just the best model scientifically that we have that fits the Scripture and fits the evidence at this time. Does that answer your question?
I think so, yes.
Okay, so yes, absolutely. We have to, because the Bible only tells us certain parts of it, and then we have the scientific evidence in front of us. So that's, okay, when I wrote my first book years ago, it was on how people could interpret the geologic column, which is God's great sense of humor, because my degree is in cell biology, and I'm writing a book on geology, and I've never taken a class in geology in my life. Okay, but the geologic column, which is the rocks and the fossils, is actually how people date the Earth. And we're getting to that. It's how people date the Earth. It's if you go into a museum and they say, this dinosaur died 65 million years ago, it's because of how they're interpreting the layers of rocks and the fossils that are found in them. That's where all that comes from, okay? And so if you understand, so we have to look at those, which are the existing evidence, and try to figure out how does that go into what the Bible does tell us. So that's what all the scientists are doing. We're doing it, they're doing it. We have to look at those rocks and fossils and say, how does that fit in? They're going, oh, well, the rocks must have been laid down over long, slow periods of time, and we see evolution in the rocks, and we're going, oh, the rocks were laid down in this horrible, catastrophic flood, and they were laid down very quickly,